Hey, folks, good evening, and thanks for joining me on Phantoms and Monsters Radio. I welcome all new listeners and members to the channel, as well as first timers in the chat. Now, Bigfoot aggression and attacks against humans are quite rare, and these creatures would rather stay hidden and live in solitude. But occasionally, a situation will arise where a human enters a Bigfoot's living area or the beast hunting location. In those instances, it may very well trigger an aggressive response. Now, there are a few tales of Bigfoot physically attacking or injuring a human, but tangible evidence is practically non existent. So, listen to this presentation and form your own opinions. So, let's go ahead and get started.
We live in a reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
So, before we go any further, I want to mention that this channel is made possible by you clicking on the subscribe and like buttons and by you sharing our programming. Super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated. You can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. The Buy Me a Coffee link is also shown below. So thanks for your consideration. Now, your comments are always welcome. Tell me which accounts you find interesting in the presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. Um, I want to thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Thomas, and Mike, for their commitment to me and the channel. And now, if you're in the chat and you have a question, please use all caps, and I'll try to get to each one after the presentation. Now, starting tonight, I am streaming on the Elevate Souls Productions Network. So I welcome all the new listeners that have come on from over there, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. So, in this first account, a 12-year-old boy encounters a Bigfoot peeking in the window as it stands on the porch. Now, this occurred in December 2012 in Port Marion, Pennsylvania. Now, they state, I just figured I would get on here and share my Sasquatch encounter that happened in a small town, Port Marion, 2012 in Fayette County, Pennsylvania. But since I know I won't be judged, laughed at, or not believed in seeing or hearing what I saw and heard. Now, I was a 12-year-old boy in sixth grade at the time playing in my neighborhood with all my 9 o'clock p.m. in late December, close to Christmas. We were all hanging out in my driveway when we all heard what seemed to be a loud animal yelling. We all got quiet and listened close to the animals making noise. As we listened, it started to sound more and more like some kind of an ape, but louder and more aggressive. We all started yelling, and the creature became louder and louder, and at some point, it just stopped. We all decided to call it in at night, and we all went home. I went inside and went to bed because I had school very next morning, so I was sleeping on the couch with my brother because I was afraid to sleep in my room alone. Now, at 4 o'clock a.m., around that time, I woke up and to go to the bathroom. But as I woke up and started to get up, I heard two loud footsteps slam down outside on the old wooden porch. I then was frozen in fear, so I stayed very still and didn't move. It was at that moment I saw it, slowly peeking around the corner, looking in the window. It was large with a man like face, but covered in hair, brown colored fur, and black eyes. As soon as it saw me, I jumped under the covers and did not move, but I could hear it outside the window making some sort of noise. 5 minutes went by that had seemed like an hour, and it started growling at the TV reflection in the window. I eventually fell asleep under the covers, sweating and frozen in fear. To this day, only one person ever believed me, but I know what I heard and I saw that night, and I will never forget it for as long as I live. Now, in Cherokee County, Texas, a resident was hiking near his cabin when the surrounding woods became deathly quiet. He felt that he was being watched. That's when a large female Bigfoot emerged. Now, he states this incident took place in November 2013 in Cherokee County, Texas, near Lake Striker. I lived in a cabin and surrounding land was owned by a fish and game club since the 1940s. And my closest neighbor was an older man who had lived most of his life on this property. Now, he would regularly remind me to take a weapon with me when I was hiking. I never paid too much attention to him, though. I decided to go hiking that afternoon. At around 1 p.m., I was headed out the door, walking past my neighbor's house and waving at him as I made my way off the trailhead. I hung a flag on the post to let people know I was hiking in that part of the property during the hunting season. No flags were on the post when I got there, so I knew I was the only one on the part of the property. I continued the trail for about a mile to the first clearing where I usually crept around a corner before I got there. There may have been some deer that I would stop and watch from a distance. This time there were no deer. I started to walk through the clearing. The feed plot was set up by the fish and game, and the lake edge was about 200 yards away. Then the normal animal sounds in the area got deathly quiet. I felt like I was being watched by something in the woods. It just doesn't get silent like that. I immediately went on guard. At this point, I was standing in the middle of the clearing away from the tree line. Now, I'll admit I was scared. I turned around to see if I could retreat the way I came from because I had no gun or weapon with me. I was ill prepared to defend myself if I needed to. After I turned around, I saw that nothing was behind me, but I wasn't sure what I was watching. I quickly walked back to the tree line. The moment I got back to the tree line facing the direction of the trailhead, I heard what sounded like a low, grumbling whoop to my right side. I froze, took a second to collect my thoughts, and started to walk right past where the sound came from. It was between me and the house. I made the decision to confront it, thinking it may be a black bear. They are rare in this part of Texas, but people see them from time to time. Now I'm 6 foot 2 inches tall, and that is what what they're supposed to be. A black bear, hog, wolf, or a mountain lion doesn't make that sound like that. That's just heard. I yelled, "Hey, this is my hill." Then it stepped out from behind a pine tree about 30 yards to my front and right, yelled back at me. It was a lot bigger than me. It then took one step over the trail and jumped to the bottom of the wash. I could hear it running on 2 feet for a few seconds. I ran back to the house. My neighbor said he heard a deep echoing yell before he saw me running home. I was scared out of my mind. I did not go hiking again that year. I believe that it was a Bigfoot. It had auburn brown hair, was 7 to 8 foot tall, with breast and large canine teeth. It looked like it would fit the traditional description of a Bigfoot from other stories that I've heard. Because of the breast, I just assumed it was a female. Was it protecting its territory? Was there a younger Bigfoot in the vicinity? My neighbor told me that he had seen a Bigfoot in the area before, but not for several years. He was concerned that I would encounter a hog or a more common animal on the trail. So, in this next account, 6 military veterans who served together in Afghanistan hiked the full length of the Appalachian Trail. In the Shenandoah Valley, they encountered an aggressive Bigfoot that attacked their camp. He states, I was on an assignment while in Afghanistan with my 6-man team with a guide. We started to enter the Korengal Valley, aka nicknamed by the locals as the Valley of Death. It's in the Kunar province. The valleys are among the deadliest places on earth. History shows countless men, groups, and military have entered but just never came out. Our God refused to take us through, so we went by ourselves. There are stories of giants, caves, demons, shapeshifters, etc. It still gives me goosebumps. Now I fast forward back to the United States. My group of six decided in our spare time to work the Appalachian Trail starting in New Hampshire and ending in Georgia. All told, it took us 7 months total to complete, with weeks in between of work as we did not complete it all at once. We were near the Shenandoah Valley area. We made camp, set up 3 tents, made a fire, cooked dinner. After dinner at about 1900 hours or 7 p.m., three of my men called Voodoo, Panther, and Deuce sat in the circle and talked. Two others, Dingle and Reaper, did perimeter watch. The camp perimeter was not far away due to the steep terrain. I would guess both sides were about 25 to 33-degree angles. None of us could see far up it was. It was too thick with trees and undergrowth brush. It was dusk when we made camp. I went to rest in my tent as I had the next watch. I heard all three of my guys say, "What the hell?" And just as I heard a loud thump on the ground and then another. Now, all of us were expert marksmen and well trained to instant access or assess any situation, draw our weapons, sight, and threat, and decide to engage within a fraction of a second. We trained for this. As I exited the tent unarmed, I was only one carrying a weapon other than a 7-inch serrated double bladed knife. As I stood up outside my tent, all three men, plus now the other two men, were standing with weapons drawn. Instantly, they started firing at this 10-foot tall creature that was about 12 foot away. It was head to toe, a very reddish brown, hairy creature. It had an ape like face and large red glowing eyes looking right at us. The growling was such a volume it reverberated in my rib cage. It was like nothing like I had ever felt before. There was a horrible mix of skunky and sulfur odor as well. It made your eyes water. It then began running with long strides that no human could. It was like a blur as it passed through the edge of the camp. Then it let out a long, loud, woman like shriek as it turned and went down that very steep ravine into the darkness of night. All the while, it snapped two trees off about 8 feet off the ground while it descended into the ravine. After it was all over, everyone rushed to the ravine edge, but it was gone. Now, our guns don't miss, especially at a close range. Just no freaking way. Here's the bizarre part. At daylight, since no one slept after that, we were all locked and loaded waiting for another attack. We looked for blood tracks. There was no blood, only two large barefoot prints. About 50 rounds were emptied into the creature at short range. Again, we all just said, no way, that's impossible. Down the ravine, about 25 to 30 feet, there were two snapped off trees, which we guessed were 4 to 5 inches in diameter. We broke camp and continued the trail southward. We're about 12 kilometers and began to believe that this thing was actually shadowing us from above. We couldn't see it, but we certainly could hear it. Maybe it was another one. Who knows? We all discussed it at great length and surmised it was obviously some man like creature. We never discussed it again. This night is etched in my mind along with that unique odor, nor will I ever forget the unique growl and shrill sound that it made. Now, a young Alabama man has a harrowing encounter with a massive Bigfoot while hiking back uh, to his truck after the day of fishing. The creature became agitated, warning the witnesses with a loud, aggressive growl. Now, he states, I never told anyone about this sighting I had when I was 18 years old, which was about 5 years ago. I later told my dad on our way to work, and he told me he's seen the same thing. He told me that there's something in the woods at Bankhead National Forest, which is in Winston, Alabama. I've only told my fiance and my father this. It really freaked me out, and I am an outdoorsman. I hunt, fish, and spend most of my time in the woods. Well, on this day, I was wading, walking in the water, and fishing at the same time. My buddy, who I usually go with, couldn't go because his son and wife were sick. But it was a beautiful day, so I decided to go on my own. I had a good day and caught a lot of fish. It was getting late in the evening, so instead of fighting the stream back up, to the, I decided to take the trail back, which was about a mile and a half hike back. I was hiking down the trail and I had this unnerving feeling that I was being watched or stalked. I paused for a moment because every single hair on my body was standing up and I had goosebumps like crazy. I also noticed this musty fish like smell. I started scanning the area to see if there was a predator or how to assess the situation. I was also wondering if I was just being spooked by a harmless, forest animal. But about that time, it was nearly dark, but I could see fairly well. I was looking through the tree line. That's when I saw it. I glanced back to see if what I was seeing, what I thought I was seeing. It was hiding behind a tree, kind of grabbing the side of it. I made eye contact with it and it started to get really scared. I've never seen anything like it. This creature was every bit of 9 foot tall with dark hair. I started to panic like I was having short breaths, like when you're terrified. I started to slowly back up. Then it suddenly stepped out like it was agitated. The beast let out a loud growl. As soon as that happened, I turned and ran as fast as I could and down the trail. I didn't stop at all. I dropped my pole and tackle box on the run. I don't remember dropping this stuff, but when I got to the parking lot, I got to my truck and cranked it up. I wanted to get the heck out of there. Then I heard it again, but it was like a loud whooping sound. I charged out of there. I still haven't gone back to this very day. I never believed in cryptid creatures until that day, and I hope I never see it again. Now, my dad told me one time that he had witnessed a man like creature running and that it cleared the road with just 2 steps. There's something out in that forest, and I was a freaky situation to go through alone. I believe I encountered a Bigfoot, but I'll never heard of them being aggressive and growling. Now, the witness in this next account states, I'll be honest that this is only the second time I've told this story to anyone. I used to live in southwest Colorado. I was attending Fort Lewis College in Durango. Beautiful area right between the mountains and desert and very close to the San Juan National Forest. At the time this happened, I was living in an apartment building very close to the school. Now, the college sits on a mesa above the actual town of Durango, and my apartment was also on this mesa. Now, right behind the complex was a ridge line called Raiders Ridge. It was very avid. I was a very avid mountain biker, and every morning I would ride a trail system up and over the Raiders Ridge. It was early morning. Behind the ridge is just a forest and a series of small ridges for at least a few miles. The area is relatively well forested with small pines and scrub pines and larger bushes. The sun hadn't gotten over the ridge, so it was somewhat light, but not brightly lit like the overhead sunlight. At the time, I was about a mile back into the ride, and I was pedaling up to another of the smaller ridges, going slower since it was relatively steep grade. Suddenly, I felt and heard something hard hit my helmet. A bit odd, but I figured it could have, been some just rolling off the ridge, so I kept on. Then it happened again, except this time it hit me right on the knuckle. Thankfully, I was wearing my riding gloves. I stopped, not really thinking anything of it, and took a drink. But as soon as I stopped, it was super quiet. I got really weirded out and almost like when someone is staring at you from across the classroom. That's when I heard it. It sounded like the lowest, deepest growl ever, like a tiger on steroids. I looked into the direction of where this came from, completely frozen. I have never heard anything with the kind of power that this thing had. I then noticed a very large black mass behind one of the larger bushes. It was sort of backlit, so I couldn't make out any discernible features, only that this thing was huge. It looked jet black, but the lighting, I guess it's possible that it was just dark brown. I'm not sure. I stared at it for what must have been a few seconds. I started freaking out on the inside, but still couldn't move. I must have only been maybe 30 foot from me. It let out another growl and it stood up on its 2 feet. Now, I'm not a big person, but this thing must have been 6.5 to 7 foot tall, lean yet very muscular. At this point, my flight response kicked in and I awkwardly shuffled my bike in 180 degrees and started out down the hill like a bat out of hell. I never looked back, but I could hear it run after me. Big, heavy thuds and breaking branches and bushes on the way. I'm not sure when it stopped following, so I was just so focused on getting away and not crashing that I couldn't say exactly when I stopped hearing it. I went down a different way than when I came up because if I didn't, I knew I would have to ride back up Raiders Ridge, and that would mean slowing down. So I went southwest, which took me to a much more popular trail, led to the main road. I just thought I needed to get to where other people were and I'd be safe, which I did. I rode across a group of trail runners and nearly crashed into them. I got to the entrance of the trail by the road and collapsed. I was exhausted, almost crying and hyperventilating. A woman stopped too, as if I asked if I was okay, and all I could say was, "I'm okay. I'm okay now." I rode all the way back home on surface streets. And not long after this thing went downhill real fast for me, I dropped out of school and fell heavily into addiction. I had to move back home to New York after that. It took me years to get better and even think about getting back into the woods. And even still, that what happens is always on my mind when I go out there. But I've learned to deal with it. I still enjoy nature, and now I figure with all the time I've spent out in the forest, and this has only happened once, what are the odds that it would happen again? But I always worry about people who go actively looking for these things. They can be extremely shy, or in my case, extremely aggressive. And you never know which it'll be. Just be careful about just be careful when you're out there. Keep your eyes and ears open. Now, this account was sent to me by an investigator. He tells me that the witness JB and his 13-year-old son were returning home from fishing at Bennett's Pay Lake in Bullitt County, Kentucky. It's a 24-hour fishing permit lake. It's approximately 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday night, July 20th. They were driving in their pickup and had just turned onto Highway 44. Then the witness's son yelled out that something large on two legs was running alongside the truck on the passenger side. It was keeping pace with the truck and was about 30 foot off the road in a field. When they reached the nearest highway, JB slammed on the brakes and turned the truck around, attempting to drive back and see whatever it was his son had described. As they started to head back on the highway, a large, hairy bipedal creature stepped out of the wooded gully along the road and stood in front of the truck. It was illuminated by the headlights, approximately 10 feet away from the witness. They immediately noticed an awful, sickening stench in the air, describing it smelling like old roadkill. The creature was 8 to 9 foot in height and very broad at the shoulders, possibly 5 foot in width. The body was covered in reddish brown thick hair, though the face was hairless with dark leathery skin. The body had well-defined muscles that were observed moving under the hair. The eyes shined a red tint. It had a menacing look and disposition and emanated a loud whooping sound like grunt. The witness always carried a sidearm with him, and he reached for it. He extended the gun out the window and yelled for the creature to stay away. The reaction of the creature was that it recognized the gun and immediately became alarmed, producing louder whooping sounds and taking a more aggressive stance, leering directly at JB. By this time, JB's son was mortified and started to scream. JB then fired a warning shot above the creature and it quickly headed off into the nearby woods. Fearing it would come back from behind them and attack, JB slammed on the accelerator and quickly turned the truck around, speeding down the highway toward home. His residence was less than a half mile from the location of the incident. Now, a few hours later, JB found my witness report information on Google and gave me a call. Quite honestly, he was one of the most terrified witnesses I'd ever talked to, exclaiming that he had no idea what this thing was and that he grew up in the outdoors and never witnessed anything like it before. I could hear the phone rattling in his hands and his voice continually breaking. He said, "I'm never going fishing or hunting again." Now, after I explained to JB that I believe he may have encountered a Bigfoot and that I had also had a similar encounter in 1981, he recounted an incident that his neighbor had experienced. Apparently, a large creature had been visiting the neighbor's yard the previous summer and had triggered the motion detectors. The neighbor had caught a fleeting glance of the creature as it exited toward the woods, but the description was not of a being comparable in size. Again, this location of the encounter was south of Louisville, Kentucky, in Bullitt County, which is very, very well known for Bigfoot encounters over the years. Now, a Northeast Washington boy is fishing with his father and his friend when he encounters a black haired Sasquatch who stands up from a kneeling position along the creek. He tells me it was a summer day in 1982. I was a kid and on the weekend fishing trip. My father and his best friend spent every spare minute out there hunting and fishing, and very often I was taken along as my parents were divorced. So on my dad's weekend, I was hunting and fishing. Now, this summer day, my dad and his buddies were fishing for brook trout in a little stream in northeast Washington state called Leclerc Creek. This is an extremely wooded area and brushy drainage off the Selkirk Mountains, where some of the only grizzlies in Washington state reside. So, to say wild, rough country would be an underestimate. This mountain range leads into Canada, and a person can walk 50 to 100 miles more or less without crossing any pavement. Anyway, the experience. I was with my dad's buddy streamside about 250 to 300 yards downstream from my dad. I wanted to find dad, so I left his buddy and started walking on the streamside game trail upstream. I was midway between my dad and his buddy and followed the creek via the game trail. As I came around the slight bend, I glanced up and saw what I thought was a burnt stump just at the backside of a slight 2 to 3 foot rise on the nearest stream bank. As I started to look back down on my feet on the trail, the stump started to rise. In utter terror and confusion, I watched as this thing stood straight up on two legs, at first facing away, towering over me from about 20 feet away. As the jet black stump stood, it turned simultaneously, just as if a person would stand from a crouching position and turned to look over his shoulder. It had hair covered human like arms bent at the elbows, the shoulders roughly 3 1/2 to 4 foot across. It glanced sideways over its shoulder at me. In terror, I screamed at the top of my lungs, and this must have confused or startled the creature. I fell to the ground and covered my head and neck, as I've been told to do if you're ever being attacked by a bear. I have no idea why I responded that way other than I was confused about what I was seeing. In fright, it must have leaped from the stream in one bound. I assume this as I heard no splash and the creature was immediately barreling like a freight train right up the opposite hillside. The sound of breaking branches from that direction stopped at about 75 yards away in the impenetrable bush. Then I heard my dad rushing through the brush toward my direction from upstream. When he got to me, he was obviously scared, as the scream I let out must have left him to believe I was being attacked by a bear or cougar. He was upset as well, as he fell in the creek and was wet to his head as he ran to my rescue. When he arrived, I started to tell him what I had seen, and simultaneously the brush began crashing again on the opposite hillside from whatever the creature was. Made noise for about 250 yards up the hill. It was loud. In my experience, I've never heard any animal make that much noise, including frightened deer, elk, moose, and bear. I know what I saw. Now, I have a college degree in fish and wildlife management, and I've spent many years also working in the woods. A human like hair covered giant man with black hair covering his back and shoulders, legs, neck, and head. The neck going to its head looked like that of a weightlifter or a linebacker, and the arms were ripped with muscle. The legs were as wide as a huge human who spent every day of their life hiking in the mountains. I can only estimate its height of about 7 to 8 foot, around 500 pounds. When I walked up to it, I speculated I was squatted down, cupping its hand to scoop a drink of water by the stream side when this little human walked around the corner, catching it off guard. I think it was startled as I was in my young age. So before the internet, I had no prior knowledge of anything such as a Sasquatch. I can only describe it as a hairy man or gorilla like thing, and not a freaking bear, until I was much older, when some artist rendering when I saw some artist rendering in a book. Some years later, and only then, I know for a fact that what I had seen and described to my father just after occurrence. He said you saw a bear and stuck to that narrative to the day he died in 1987. My mother, on the other hand, knew I'd seen something else, as I talked about it for months afterwards. She has scrutinized my story multiple times over the years, and the story has stayed consistent over those years. So, folks, that's the last account. If you have questions, post them and I'll see what I can answer for you. B3 Airspace. Lon, do you think there is no concrete evidence of Bigfoot with so many sightings and stories? Uh, there's been very little physical evidence found. No bodies. Um, and many of you know that I believe that the Bigfoot and other cryptid creatures are possibly interdimensional supernatural beings. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. You know, I've had an encounter back in 1981 myself. As far as I'm concerned, this was a flesh and blood being. It was corporeal, and I heard it making noise. I heard it stepping away, and I don't know. I kind of leave that up to anybody to make their own determination. Is I'm hopeful one day we will have some type of concrete or tangible evidence as to as to what these beings are. Carol, I asked, can a Bigfoot be damaged? I have heard so many instances of these creatures being shot at by guns, and it just either going through or bouncing off, or some type of supernatural light emanating from the beast when it's struck by a bullet. But apparently, it doesn't do much good. I mean, Stan Gordon talks about an incident that was reported to him about 40 years ago of a woman who had a Bigfoot outside her cabin, scared the heck out of her. She shot it with a shotgun several times, and each time she fired, a big white light emanated from the creature, but it continued to stand there. So, can they be damaged? Can they be hurt? Can they be killed? Who knows? Any more questions, folks? Grandizer 12, Lon, he may have thought he had seen a Bigfoot, but it could have been a Gugway. That is even worse. You know, I think there are different types of creatures out there. I think Sasquatch, Bigfoot are just, the name that everybody uses, but, in other areas, they had different names. Maybe maybe these hairy hominids have races or other types of, or another type of species. Um, you know, that's entirely possible. It could have been a Gugaway. Could have been a lot of things. Next question. Mortal Clown. Anyone know the state with most Bigfoot sightings? Well, that would probably be Washington State and Pacific Northwest, Northern California, Oregon, and Pacific Northwest. But there are a lot of states with a lot of sightings. I mean, Texas, around the Gulf Coast, particularly in Florida and in the bayous of Louisiana, there's creatures. We have a few up in the upper Midwest. Here in Pennsylvania, we've had several sightings. I've been called out on several sightings. So, but I would say that the Pacific Northwest probably has the most activity. Kevin Emery, do you feel psychic energies from them when when you've had encounter? I didn't feel anything when I had my encounter. Now, I have talked to witnesses who state that they do have some type of psychic connection or seem to be able to communicate with them psychically. I think it's entirely possible. But you know, as far as actual communication, I haven't really heard much of that. But personally, no, I haven't had any communication or anything, or with my encounter. Dagnammit, is there any connection between Bigfoot and orbs in the woods? Well, in more recent years, I'd say the past decade or so, many times when we have investigated a sighting area, even a couple days later, we will see orbs occasionally. Now, I have had several investigators, especially here in Pennsylvania, talk about um, going into areas where there have been Bigfoot sightings and seeing orbs. Now, how can you explain that? Could it be some type of portal opening, or are the orbs actually associated with the creature itself? We just don't know. Maybe one day we'll find out more, but yeah. And a bachelor. If all these sightings with Bigfoot happen, why can't we ever take a pic of them? There's a lot of theories behind that. Can they sense someone trying to take a photograph of them? Do they have some type of ability or supernatural ability to avoid being photographed? Is there something natural about them that they're cloaked? We talk about the Glimmerman theory where these things can somehow cloak themselves supernaturally. There are a lot of theories, uh, but many times people do say that they are hard to photograph, or they're unable to, or they think they got a photograph and it just didn't show up. There are many times when you see a trail cam photograph or image where it kind of breaks up a lot of times. I think they do possibly have supernatural abilities to avoid being photographed in some respects. Amy Crude, off topic. Lon, have you received any Darrow stories? Nope, can't say that I have. Sorry. Jose Sanchez, besides being allegedly interdimensional, could they also disappear to hidden caves and maybe underneath tunnels as well? They may have great knowledge of such places. Well, there's people that do believe that. Um, Maybe they do cloak themselves or are able to quickly disappear into a hidden cave or some type of underground. Um, there's a lot of theories about that. I mean, who knows what these creatures really are? And like I said, until we get to the point where we can literally and tangibly investigate them and study them, I don't think we're ever going to know. And a bachelor, could it just be active imagination? Absolutely. Any everybody has their own way of perceiving something. They may believe they see something, their mind may interpret it as something else. They may go into the woods thinking that they're going to see a Bigfoot and see one, some type of thought form or tulpa. Um, it's not unheard of. Hey, Bruce, have you heard of any friendly Bigfoot encounters? There have been a few. Uh, none that I've ever investigated, though there have been many people who have stated in the past that they have these creatures will at some point uh, come up to them and asking for some type of help, or that they're able to, uh, you know, be involved with habituation where they get used to the human being around or gifting and such. I've heard all kinds of stories. I've talked to a lot of investigators who claim this to be true. Personally, I have never experienced that, but there are claims that this does happen. Jose Sanchez, Bigfoot might also have advanced camouflage techniques that we are still unaware of. Absolutely. Like I said, I've talked about the Glimmer Man, so yeah, maybe there is something to that. Jan Chastin, Jan Chastin. Lon, have you had any Bigfoot encounters? I have, and I have talked about that. It's a long story, but I had an encounter in May 9th, 1981, near Sykesville, Maryland. If you go online and search Sykesville Monster and with my name, you'll find it because it's up there. It's on my site too. Jose Sanchez. In those areas you mentioned, could there be more portals as such, more Bigfoot activity? You know, I don't think I think that some areas may actually have indigenous beings like the Pacific Northwest where there are natural beings that live in those areas. I think it's the same in Florida with the skunk apes in some areas around the Gulf Coast. I think there may be natural creatures that are Bigfoot, but I also believe in majority of areas that when you see a singular being that just suddenly shows up or vanishes, that these may be supernatural, interdimensional beings. So who knows? Sir Wolf, hi Lon. Apparently, sometimes the military go in and take them out. What do you think? I've heard a lot of stories. I've read about a lot of accounts where, especially in the Appalachian Mountains, where there have been special forces who have apparently gone on and hunted these things down. Are they true? Who knows? I mean, some of the accounts I heard do sound you know, very reliable, but I don't know. It's just like anything else. What is it you believe? I mean, do you believe that there are rogue creatures out there, rogue Bigfoot that are out there trying to harm people, trying to chase down people, or just trying to cause a lot of mayhem? I don't know. I don't know. Barbara Mora, there is a book called Enoch and the Book of Enoch, two different books, right? Um, yeah, the Book of Enoch is a is part of the is an old verse from the Old Testament, and it's not in the King James version of the Bible, but it is a book that was eventually taken out of the Bible uh, in what conference was that? I don't know, but it was many years ago. Now, the Enoch book was a book written by I forget her first name, but I know her last name was Williams, and I have read it. My honest opinion, I've got questions about it. I mean, it was supposed to be an habituation type situation, but I don't know. There's a lot about that book that I didn't really believe, and I've written about that as well. Jose Sanchez, any recent reports on UFO Bigfoot connection activity? Not recently, and I haven't received anything recently. In the past, and especially around the 1973 UFO flap in Pennsylvania, there were at least two encounters supposedly between Bigfoot and UFO, or possibly these creatures came from UFOs. Uh, But more recently, no, we really don't. We really don't have them. Granddaughter 12, Lon, the story of Galag. Do you believe that story or just never got enough evidence to say either way? Honestly, I don't even know what you talk. I don't know which account you're talking about. Maybe you can write me and I can give you a better answer. Any more questions? Okay, I guess that's it. So, folks, I want to thank you each for coming in and watching and chatting. If you have donated, it's truly appreciated. Your support is what makes all this possible. Please like, subscribe, and share. If you do have a sighting or encounter report that you'd like to be considered for the this personal report show or on Phantoms of Monsters, feel free to contact me on my email at lonstrickler@phantomsofmonsters.com. So until we meet again next Friday night, stay healthy and safe. Have a good night. Thank you.
We live in a reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.